Okay. Welcome to the legislative delegation meeting. I'm talking in the microphone because we are actually recording today. It's January 10th, 2019. With us is I guess we do roll call, right? Let's see, we've got, we're missing Councilmember McNeil, but we have Representative Shelley Kloba, Senator Guy Palumbo, and Representative Derek Stanford. Hi, Derek. And then a whole hodgepodge of city staff. So, we'll get started here. And so when it is your turn to talk, though, do you use the microphone so that it can be heard, be broadcasted. We're fortunate to have a seasoned and established representative group of delegates for our area. I've worked with quite a few of you for some time. And so we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today and hear what, Bothell would really like to see happen for our city during this session. We have our legislative agenda. I'm sure you guys have read it thoroughly and have comments and ideas and stuff. Okay, good. So we're going to go over that with you a little bit, just in case you haven't totally digested the whole thing. And then we're going to hopefully have open dialogue. So if you do have questions or just break in as we broke up the talk, so I don't have to you don't have to listen to me all night long with different council members bringing up the different points that are in our legislative agenda. So yeah, so that's about it. Do you guys have any questions? Let's go. All right, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you to our representatives and senator for your ongoing engagement and support of the investments along I-405. This upcoming biennium is really critical for the continued implementation of the I-405 master plan. We know that Washington need to request a toll authorization bill, which will authorize tolling on I-405 from Renton to Bellevue, make tolling permanent on I-405 from Bellevue to Linwood, make the 167 hot lanes permanent, convert I-405 and SR 167 into a single corridor, and toll authorization for the Puget Sound Gateway project. We do support this toll authorization effort as the first step to secure necessary funding for North End improvements. We're communicating with our I-405 stakeholder group and are working with a broad coalition of supporters, recognizing that tolling must be authorized on the entire corridor for it to function properly and to generate the revenue needed to fund future improvements. We understand there are conversations about potentially bonding against the toll revenue to pay for projects along the corridor. We support the legislature's authority to make funding decisions either through bonding or direct appropriation and ask that the legislature fund $20 million for the right-of-way acquisition and $450 million for construction of North End improvements on 405. It's important these investments are made this biennium because WashDOT will need to begin construction in 2021 in order to have the dual express toll lanes and direct access ramps completed in time for the BRT in 2024. I guess that's it. I want to thank you. You guys have been so supportive in the past in getting the funding for design of the project, and obviously these improvements are really critical for the BRT to work, and the timeline is critical also for it to be in place by 2024 when BRT opens. So thanks.
That was quick. Did you? For a lot of money too. Did you guys have any questions about that project?
We glossed over 450 million.
Yeah, that was. You did say 450 million, right? Okay.
Just chump change.
It's a big, or was it big capital budget year, right? Okay, moving on. Did you guys, legislators, have any questions or comments on that? Yeah, can you guys just write the check? Okay, moving on to the Canyon Park sub-area plan. We have council member, well, it says Olson and Zorns. You guys gonna tag team it? McNeil's not here though, so you can take McNeil's one his. All right, Councilman Olson.
All right, so we have the Canyon Park sub-area plan. So this was one of those topics that when I came on board was, a very big item for us. I come across it in lots of different areas, attending some, educational for PSRC. They talk about growth centers and just all these requirements that we need to meet to keep our status as our growth center. So 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 the last session, Cascadia College received $300,000 from the legislature towards the workforce development. Thank you very much for the efforts funding this. So Cascadia shared half of it, $150,000, with the city to be used towards planning efforts at Canyon Park. So through that funding, it's allowed us to develop a land use plan with transportation analysis and an initial environmental review. So our ask for you tonight is for $400,000 from the state operating budget to assist with the cost of completing the sub-area plan, including the final environmental review and the implementation strategies. So this is a critical step in attracting developers and growing the area's biomedical and life science industries, and just continuing our outreach and understanding of our growth center. I just want to keep saying growth center because it's crucial. I just want to also, in my conversations earlier with Tori, we were talking about that really this is kind of the Snohomish County's kind of piece, how we are so successful downtown Bothell here and moving this up to the north end and get that economic engine and development and residential and just all those pieces and transportation just developed, figured out, and really engaging that area in the north end Snohomish County portion of our city.
Got to get used to the new technology. Thank you for that. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate how important Canyon Park is and the plan that you guys are doing. So when we talk to the companies there, we're dealing with the biotech industry there quite a bit on workforce development, obviously. And what, aside from getting people in and out of Canyon Park on 405, which is one of their top issues in workforce development, second issue, it's the area that's there. There's not enough housing, which I know you guys know, and not enough retail and things for the employees to go get lunch at, so to speak, because they don't walk from that center down to by where the Fred Meyer is. So we have a vested interest in figuring out that housing piece as well as that kind of mixed use retail piece to continue to bring jobs there. We were hopeful for Juneau, putting another 500 jobs in there. Obviously they just got bought out. Celgene just got bought out. So we don't know how that's going to go yet. But we're really trying to increase the job count in Canyon Park. And I think that's a critical component. So this 400 is really needed. I know we tried a couple of years in a row. We got 150. We need more. But we really need to figure that Canyon Park thing out. That is going to be the economic driver, I think, not only of the area, but South Snohomish in the future.
Just out of curiosity, does the first district have other economic hubs in it for other industries? Do you guys know?
You got a little bit of tech in Kirkland, you got Google down there, but nothing like Canyon Park that is.
Like a biomedical hub?
Yeah, that many companies in one area in one industry.
Okay.
Nor I would also say, are there, the opportunity to unleash a whole lot of growth. I mean, I think there's a lot of pent up potential right now in Canyon Park that perhaps doesn't, not really happening in Montlake Terrace or Kirkland for that matter, and of course not in Briar, because that's not their agenda. They're very much just a housing type of community with not much interest in jobs. But I think this is interesting, and it kind of points to me to one of the problems in Kirkland is that there are a lot of jobs in Kirkland, but I think it's about 1 in 10 jobs that are located in Kirkland are held by a person who lives in Kirkland. And so, and then vice versa. Of all of the people who work in Kirkland, there's about 30,000 people who are employed. Only 1 in 10, they all commute out. And to me, it's partly there's some economic development there, but that's a big traffic problem. That's where some of your traffic comes from, is this exchange every single day in and out of the city. And so insofar as you can have places where folks can live within a reasonable distance from where they work, that has benefits beyond just the traffic, but also even into people's individual budgets. I know just starting out, I was able to work 2 jobs that were a 5-minute walk from the housing that we lived in Mill Creek. And being able to get along with only 1 car allowed us to start that little nest egg that kind of gets you along the way, that we know that our millennials are having so much struggle with. So I think this is something that's great benefit in a lot of different venues. I mean, kind of a drop in the bucket that the circles spread, I guess I should say.
I think it was two years ago now, that the Puget Sound Regional Council, they were looking at how they identify urban growth boundaries, or regional growth centers, sorry. And Canyon Park was literally on the chopping block. Like, we pulled that whole thing out of the fire, basically. And it wasn't like the other cities wanted to, take it out on Bothell or anything like that. But at the end of the day, it is the least productive regional growth center, I think, in the 4 counties. Is it? Yeah, I think that's correct. Just based on actually meeting its targets and its visioning. So revisioning it is something that we need to do. And just because that conversation is going to come back up again if the PSRC opens that book again, looks at what are regional growth centers, and they still see that Bothell actually didn't do anything or changed it, or try to get some growth there, that we're going to be in a situation where we might lose that status, which would be unfortunate.
Can I just add that we have a potential big issue as well with 12 acres possibly being purchased for the BRT bus barn, which will come out of our regional growth center. And right now they're not offering to help us with housing of any sort on that site. So we definitely will have to plan around that if that happens.
Is that in the IPC?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 12 acres of the IPC is potentially going to become the bus barn for Sound Transit, for the bus rapid transit. All 4.
However, I would state that, Mayor Ream, you sent a letter, which I thought was pretty positive, and asked for them to reconsider that site and how you would do housing. And I thought their response was, we'll try and cooperate and work with you. Is that correct? Yeah, what do you think about that response?
We'll see. I just kind of, at this point, we'll see what they actually do. We did see a really nice letter from Councilmember Claudia Balducci. Is that the letter you're talking about? Yeah, that one was solid. That was appreciated. But we'll see. It's a board of, a regional board of sitting on $50 billion. So you don't know what they can do anything they want, basically. Okay. Any other stuff on the Regional Growth Center? Mr. Catterman, did we get our facts straight? We didn't make stuff up? Okay. Let's see, downtown revitalization. So in 2009, one of the things that's been fun being the mayor for the last 3 years is people come up to me like, oh, I just love the downtown Bothell revitalization. It's such a beautiful, like rebirth of an area. I grew up here, and it was just, there was nothing there. As a child, there was stuff there, but it wasn't like anything like it is now. But with that, when we moved 522 and extended 527 down to connect to it, we purchased a lot of contaminated property, basically, 2 state routes that are there for a century, with gas stations and dry cleaning shops, and a century of those really caused a lot of pollution. So we've been cleaning it up for some time, and we have had help from the state. I think it's about a 50% match. Is that correct? Yeah. Don't let me make stuff up, or I will.
So we have several sites that we're working on, and one large one is not in the formal program, so that hasn't been subject to the 50% match, but most of them are subject to 50% match. So we've spent about probably $14 million, and about probably about $5 million of that has come back through various grant programs.
Okay.
So
yeah, 14 million in cleanup, but we're not done.
we're not done.
We're not done.
No.
So that's why on our state capital budget, ask of 1.5 million to help us get to the finish line on the cleanups. Block D, which is kind of I would say the crown jewel or the gateway lot into the downtown revitalization. I believe that is where we would spend that money. Is that right? Okay. To finish cleaning it up. I don't know if you guys knew, but they have rods in the ground right now that are heating the soil up, and it like gases out the dry cleaner chemicals, which is, I don't know if you watched Total Recall, but as a kid I did, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Mars thing goes into the ground and releases all the, that's what I think of when I think of Lot D. So we want to continue our Mars creating Mars and Lot D going forward next year. Anyways, and then it's just good to get those chemicals cleaned up because, well, the river wasn't that far anyways. But if the city didn't step in and do what we did, I don't think anybody would have ever been able to buy that property and spend $14 million to try to clean it up and, see it be revitalized. And it's been really important to us. So we could use the help getting it across the finish line.
Question for you.
Yeah.
So is that, just to be clear, is this 1.5 million ask for all the rest of the property, the one that we see on this other page here? Is that all 3 properties, or is that just one of these properties?
So it's specific to Block D. So you'll see
Okay.
on the back of that page, it shows Block D. We have 3 different contamination sites that affect Block D. One is the Bothell Service Center that the mayor referenced with the Mars expedition. And we have a petroleum site that is nearly finished with cleanup. And then we have another petroleum site that we're just now starting with determining what's there and how we're going to clean it up. So
So what would the 1.5 get you?
it
What do you
would get us finished.
Done? All
Block
3
D.
cleanups?
Yes.
Okay. And is this not part of the MACA right now? You don't have a grant in for MACA for this?
We have a grant from MACA. However, as you probably know, it requires a 50% match.
Okay, so that's where this comes in.
Right.
And I'll just add to that, the reason that it's that 1.5 million is so significant is because if Block D can be cleaned up, then it can be sold and then it can begin generating revenue. So then there's more resources to clean up the remaining sites.
So you're looking for direct member asks at this point? Okay.
Correct.
And then another question along those same lines, are there any other grants that are kind of on lists that we should be tracking, whether remedial action grants or MACA related or anything else that we should just be tracking to get through the process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So right now there is a grant for the Bothell Service Center that was on the Department of Ecology's agency request legislation. And we're working with the agency to make sure that the way that funding is requested matches the need that the city has. So we'll be working with the agency to make sure that the information that's shared with the legislature as you all develop your budget matches the city needs. But again, that funding does require a 50% match. So this capital budget request will still be needed, even if the legislature's budget through RAG funds city projects.
That's why we hired a lobbyist. She talks to you guys' lingo. Yeah. Let's see, where are we? Here we are, the bridge at Bothell Landing, Councilmember Agnew.
Now for something complete, on that Mars thing, wasn't that oxygen that it brought out, not
It stuck rods in the
hazardous
ground.
materials?
I don't know.
I mean,
It was Mars.
I'm just trying to think out loud here. The city of Bothell fully supports the funding of the Washington Wildlife Recreational Program, WWRP. If it's funded to its recommended level of $130 million, that we would receive $1.08 million. And we'd use that for the bridge at Bothell Landing. The bridge at Bothell Landing is 35 years old and is in desperate need of repair, and it has about 1.2 million users annually that connect the Burke-Gilman Trail into downtown Bothell. If the WWRP is funded at the 90 million, we'll be unable to fund the replacement of that bridge. And we already have some federal money that we received, and we'll lose that also. So it is very imperative that we could try to get the WWRP funded to its fully funded level of 130 million. We'd appreciate it a bunch.
If it's at 130, where are you between 90 and 130 though? I forget off the top of my head. In your ranking?
If it's funded at 100 million, the city receives the full 1.08.
100, okay. And just a comment, thank you for, I know we tried to do this last year and it didn't work out, but there was a recognition on our, at least in the Senate on the Capitol team that, losing federal funds is not okay. So this is on people's radar as a priority. Obviously, it's ranked there. If we don't get it up to 100, we may need to think about a transportation ask of some kind, but certainly you don't want to lose that matching funding. That would be a waste of, anytime we can get 1-to-1 on our money with taxpayer dollars, that's a good thing.
And I'm very glad that you included the level of usage that bridge sustains. And as I'm thinking along the route from the Burt Gilman, how otherwise would I get to Bothell? And it really is the best way to do it in the most convenient and safe manner. And it's also very picturesque and is an iconic part of your, logo and branding. And so I think does the repaired bridge, the vision to have it look the same as it currently does for a large part?
Essentially, yes. So right now, the current bridge is not what we call ADA compliant. It's too steep, as many of you who have used it would realize. So the new bridge the deck will be flatter, but we'll still have the iconic arch. So it may act a little different, but it will look similar.
And then is this the last year for us to try to get the state funds, or the federal money's gone? Is that right? Okay. That'd be bad. All right. Oh, wow. Super. Councilmember McNeil is here. And it's your turn.
Good timing.
Do you want us to pinch hit for you? Do you want us to pinch hit? I got Councilmember Zorns on the deck. Yeah, Councilmember Zorns, it's your piece of the agenda.
No, I'm sorry, I can speak to,
Yeah, we're recording.
okay.
Don't swear.
I'll be fine. Well, first, sorry for being late, but I appreciate everybody coming out and the important stuff for here in our community. And I think you've heard me speak many, many times about the importance of law and justice, community relations, and what the police department means. But ensuring that we have proper training for law enforcement, I think, is critical. So, I think one of the issue here, we have Criminal Justice Training Center funding for the CDGC is critical and important, and making sure that we keep those at the levels that are important to make sure that we get that training for those officers. So, you want me to speak more?
Well, we did pass a levy, so we do have a lot of police officer positions that we're looking to fill in the next coming few years. So having the ability to get the new officers hired and through the training, I think, is going to be important for us to deliver to the community on our levy that they passed, and fantastically passed, actually.
So the good news on this particular issue, which I've been championing for all the reasons that you state, and of course with some excellent background understanding of why it's important to cities all over our state, including Bothell and Kirkland and Montlake Terrace. We circulated a letter, and Senator Palumbo, Representative Stanford, both signed on to it, along with 41 members of the House and Senate, to support exactly what you're asking for here, 19 classes in the Basic Law Enforcement Academy. We fully understand the difficult bind that it puts cities and counties, for that matter, into when you can, hire someone to fill the positions that we are losing every day because of baby boomers retiring, and you have to have them on your payroll and not out in the community serving because we can't give you the openings to be able to get them into the academy. It's a inefficient and wasteful and way to do things, and it costs you money as well as community safety potentially. So that is a big emphasis that I will have this year. And so hopefully we can get to the 19 level and, I don't know, perhaps consider that maintenance funding from here on forward, at least until we can whittle down that pool of folks who are waiting.
So yeah, I think, Chief, we talked about it before, but I think that before my time at the legislature, there was this $1.50 or $1.60 fee on speeding tickets and things like that, that used to go towards this funding, and then the legislature swept it for other reasons. So we've been talking about hopefully maybe trying to put that back, just let that ticket fee go towards the academy, So hopefully we'll get that done.
I definitely support dedicated funding. I think there's also going to be a bill coming forward to, rather than the legislature requiring, I think 6 months is the longest wait time, pushing that back to 3 months, because that would help to, or 2 perhaps, okay. That's where the bill is coming from, is from the law enforcement community, so I will trust your numbers on that. And I think that that's an important piece of the whole puzzle, reestablishing that dedicated funding stream that is, it totally makes sense. There's a real nexus there. And, making sure that it's adequate for the needs that our communities are having. There's probably too many things that we mandate and push onto the backs of our local governments. And this is one thing that does not need to be, you guys don't need to be the ones bearing the burden for this because we haven't funded it appropriately.
How many police positions you said there's a whole bunch. Do you guys have like a ballpark of how many police officer positions throughout the state are kind of waiting to get into the academy?
I actually have that number on my desk, but, and it's, there's a several hundred backlog. I mean, the commissioner, Sue Rohr, who runs the CJTC, has tracked that very, very carefully. And that's where part of this problem has been, is that the backlog keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And by having that support for the 19 classes, it's going to start slowly whittling away with that. So I deeply, deeply appreciate all of your support on this very important issue.
So all the cities are paying for hundreds of officers that aren't trained and waiting just to be trained to get out on the streets.
Mm-hmm. And then the problem is, if by chance you have an officer that doesn't successfully make it through the academy or through field training, which does happen, then you're back to square one, and you've lost 5 or 6 months just in wait time alone. So, it can be anywhere from, a year and a half at the best to, 2+ years to fill a vacancy with this backlog. So it's really, truly needed and appreciated.
So what do they do when they're waiting on the list? What do the officers do?
So every department's a little different, and I won't go into a lot of the details, but for Bothell, we try to make it as productive a time as possible to be able to give them information and training, maybe give them introduction to firearms, or to go out on patrol and do ride-alongs, to be able to listen to the radio, to learn some of the basics. But if you've got a 5-month wait, that gets, by the end, it's getting a little hard to come up with stuff. So, anyway, you can only tell them to go read policy for so many hours.
That sounds like torture.
I know that some of our cities have normally a regular employed officer doesn't get the opportunity to do their physical training while they're on duty. That's an extra thing you do in your own free time. But what we were finding was sometimes a reason a recruit might wash out is because they don't have the fitness level. And so it's a little controversial, but we're making part of what our recruits are getting paid for while they're waiting to get in the academy is to do their physical training so that they are, at the top and ready to go. And that, that will be one less reason why they might not be successful at the academy. So there's different ways that they try to be as constructive as possible with the time.
Exercising full time would be all. Just like, all right.
So, one other thing, Mayor. So, have you guys heard about the retirements for like the Washington State Patrol? I heard their retirement class is very high right now, and getting officers trained.
There was a study done within the last couple of years that said, I want to say it was 43% of current law enforcement are within 5 years of retirement age. That's the silver tsunami and how it is going to impact us in terms of community safety. So it's definitely a problem whose time has come.
All right, we're on to the last but not least, Councilmember McAuliffe.
Well, I'm going to add a little bit more than this, and then I'll come over to your goals. But there is a couple of things I do think is really important, and I appreciate the fact on your newsletter, Senator Palumbo, that you're looking at the $3 million for the University of Washington, pre-designed for a new STEM building, STEM science building. That's kind of when we get to grow our own, you know, when we have our own STEM students coming in here, and then they are living here, they're learning here, and then they're going to be part of our community. And we know what a big demand it is for a STEM job. So I really appreciate that as well. And I'm sure Shelley and Senator Stanford, you support that as well. I just have to tell you an interesting story, but we needed to have the science building at the University of Washington, Bothell. And we were when Obama came from the airplane, when he was at Boeing's Field, then Senator Kilmer met with the president of the University of Washington at that time, and they sold Wellington Hills, and that's how we got our first science building. So be creative. There is a way. But I think when you talk, Shelley, about how people working and living here, that's how we grow our own, and that's how those students will stay here and work here. Because we have a very high tech corridor here, and there's many jobs, but we actually have our students ready to go. So I appreciate that very much. The next thing I want to add in here is the Washington State Opportunity Scholarship. So I know that you sent, Senator Plumbo, Seattle to talk to me about this, and there's 6 cities that are now ready to go. So if we put the language in for municipalities being able to be a part of the scholarship program, then we can grow our own students as well. So that's really important that we change that language and not just have private companies doing the Washington State Scholarship, but also municipalities. And one more. Let's see. What was it? My third one. Oh, statewide ban on disposable plastic bags. Please. The environment is so important, and we know how important that is. So I don't know if it's a full council support, but I really want to make that statement. So now it's your turn to let us know about your priorities and your goals.
Who would like to go first?
I like to defer to Derek because he's more senior.
That's right.
I try to be
I didn't get your news.
There you go.
So I'm attorneys on that side of the table.
Sure. So as you're probably aware, you know, a lot of the big issues just in general for the legislature are going to be around education, funding, transportation. I mean, no surprise, that's kind of big stuff every time. For me personally, I'm the new chair of the Commerce and Gaming Committee, so I'll be focusing on issues around cannabis, alcohol, and gambling. There's, I suppose, a little bit of overlap between that and some local issues. I don't think that that's a huge issue in Bothell right now, but certainly I want to be open to any input you might have if there are bills concerning citing of marijuana stores, for example. And I expect that mostly we'll just be focused on kind of adapting to the evolving industry and making sure the industry is growing and flourishing, but at the same time balancing that with public health concerns about all of those things, gambling, alcohol, and cannabis. So if there are bills that you see, please do reach out to me about that if you have any concerns or want to support something. And when I see things that have local impacts, I'll be reaching out to your lobbyist to try to get feedback from the local cities here. So I'll also be continuing on the Appropriations Committee and on the newly renamed Consumer Protection and Business Committee. So I'll be certainly tracking these budget-related issues as we head into session, and working to find some funds to make all this stuff work. And then a personal priority for me, as you probably know, the Shelton View Forest is something I've been working on, and I appreciate that the city kept that on the policy manual. I know it's not on this list, but I appreciate that expression of support from the city. And so I'll be working to try to find funding for purchasing the MC Coast parcel, which we currently have some funding for from the Snohomish County Conservation Futures Fund, and see if we can move forward with that, and hope that we'll be able to do that in a way that works financially for the city. I know that the city doesn't have funds to be putting into that purchase right now, so I'm certainly not expecting that. And hope to continue talking with you about costs that might be involved in simply owning that as a public open space. I have spoken with DNR about their parcel in Shelton View, and the kind of the costs that they've had in owning that, and they said it's been quite minimal, and they actually pointed out that the Shelton View Forest Association has been doing a lot of trail maintenance and making sure there's no garbage in there and that sort of thing. So they haven't really had any, they couldn't point to any costs they've had in owning that. So I'm hopeful that's kind of a model that that will be possible to pursue, to keep, basically keep the financial impact off of the city, because I know that clearly money is tight right now. So look forward to discussing that more with you as we go.
May
Thanks.
I just say that we do have Shelton View Forest on our policy manual here. And thanks to Councilmember McNeil, it is a really important issue as well. And our people are very, very strong and have a strong voice in this. So I appreciate your work.
All right, so I am continuing to serve on Commerce and Gaming, so I really look forward to the leadership of our new chair. I think we're going to have a very good year on that committee. Transportation is also, very vital and central to the daily lives of everybody in this community, and the entire LD for that matter. They have a lot of different ideas about how we need to solve the problems that I think we can pretty much agree on what the problems are, but the solutions are a little bit different. So I will definitely keep your voices in mind, and I think it's really important that we do have the support of the city and of the business community to tackle the problems on 405 in particular, 522, et cetera. And then I'm also serving on what used to be Tech and Economic Development, but we've now added innovation to the front of that. So I'm excited about any of the new issues that might come in front of us. But one of the things that's going to occupy quite a lot of my time with regard to that committee is around consumer data privacy. And if anybody was paying attention in May, all of a sudden you kept getting privacy notices, like updating our privacy policy, sometimes with companies you knew you were a customer of, other times with companies you didn't know had your data. And so that should have sparked a little bit of awareness, I think, in people's minds. But that came about because of something that happened in the European Union. They created the General Data Privacy regulations. And that's a set of rights that they declared that people have around their personally identifiable data. So there will be a number of bills coming into play in the legislature, some that look like this GDPR set of rules that come over straight from the EU, some that will look like highlighting some of the things that California has done as a state with regard to privacy, some that will be sort of hybrids in between. So we'll be managing all of that. And then related to that too, when there is a breach of data privacy and someone has, hacked into your credit card company, for instance, the current requirement is that they notify you within 45 days, and I'll be running a bill that brings that down to 30 days. And I think that makes a little more sense if you think of a credit card billing cycle. The shorter that would be, the better. So I know the data privacy stuff will start to really take up a lot of my time, and it's very interesting. I would encourage you, one of the things that you, if you did read any of those new privacy updates, they're actually mostly in plain language, which is another thing. I mean, I read one and went, oh, okay, that's frightening because I understand it now and I know what I'm signing away. But I would encourage all of you to start reading those and kind of get a sense of what is being collected about you and what is being done with it. Because I think pretty much everybody will have an opinion on that. With regard to, we already heard on the Criminal Justice Training Academy, getting some research or some funding for that. Another budget item I'm going to be pursuing is research funding for cannabis. There are a variety of issues, whether it be the healthcare benefits, the potential downsides, the social aspect, the labor market aspects of cannabis and how we're managing it and what we do with the taxes and everything else. The decisions that we make as a state need to be based on data when it comes to cannabis, and it still is by and large a very new frontier for us. And so the 502 law the initiative that was passed really envisioned that we would spend a decent amount of money on research, and we haven't done it yet. And we're, 5 years in. So really be championing that. And in terms of, keeping our community safe and keeping retailers safe, we currently, if you are an establishment that sells alcohol to your patrons, anybody who is involved in that transaction has to do a mandatory alcohol servers training, just to make sure that everybody stays safe and nobody's overserved and all of the rules and regulations are followed. We don't currently have that officially in the cannabis realm. And so you go to your local pub and they're a bartender. If you go to your retail establishment for cannabis, they're called a bud tender. So very cute. So I'll be doing I'll be putting forward a bill that requires a mandatory bud tender training that's very analogous to, but tailored a little bit differently, analogous to the alcohol industry, but tailored for the cannabis. But I think that that's something that just adds one more element of safety to our communities and make sure that we're not, even though on the cannabis side of things, they're 92% compliant on sales to underage minors, that 92% of the time when they're faced with it, they don't, and that's better than on the alcohol side of things. So they are much tighter with that, but I think that's an important thing that all of us in our communities value. So I think the only one other thing, and it's not a huge thing, it's just a little tiny bill, but it may have some impact, so I'll probably be looking to see if cities have any input on it, but it's called a PDD. It's a personal delivery device. If you picture sort of an igloo cooler on 4 wheels with cameras front and back and lights, and weighs about 120 pounds and has a little touchpad, a code, so that if you are, sitting at home and you desire to have, a local teriyaki shop deliver dinner to you, you can do that transaction and it will come to you. And this device uses the sidewalk and has to follow all of the rules that a pedestrian does. But if you can come up with any issues or potential conflicts or things that you might think that your folks in your city would have an issue about, I'd love to hear that conversation. I know it's a brave new world we're in.
Between that and the Lime bikes, we're in big trouble. I wanted to ask, from your position on the Transportation Committee, if there was anything any heads up you could give us on your work. Anything besides what we've already mentioned or that we've already mentioned that we should know?
I think this city does a wonderful job of staying in the loop, in on the conversation, whether it's WashDOT or Sound Transit. the business community, I think between you are participating in the Fixing 522, I think, and you're on the 405 stakeholders. I see you guys as leaders. I don't feel like you know anything I don't. And so that's definitely commendation to you guys as a city for tracking that stuff really well. But maybe Senator Palumbo, you know everything, so maybe there is something you have to add from the Senate side.
On that note.
Thank you, and thanks for your support last year.
That's so
It was
funny.
really helpful.
Thank you, Philly. I'm a policy nerd. I'm kind of known as that, so I tend to have too many bills. So I'm not going to go through all. I found out last night I have 34 apparently, so that's too many. And I'm starting to try to give those away to freshmen. So I'm not going to go through all 34 bills. But my committee assignments for those at home are as the Ways and Means. I'm on Ways and Means, which is the Budget Committee in the Senate. I'm the Vice Chair of the Energy, Environment, and Technology Committee, and I'm the new chair of the Higher Education and Workforce Development Committee. So I'm pretty excited about that. Regarding kind of issues, my own personal bills, I tend to have a lot in the energy space. So I have a lot on solar, a lot on electric vehicles, a lot around reducing our emissions in the state. And there's several bills, and we have the governor's agenda, which is a strong one this year. I think that last year, a lot of the environmental bills died at the end. And what should have been a very big year for the environment wound up being a very bad year for the environment, at least policy-wise. And I don't see that happening again. So with the new margins in both chambers and some different leadership, I think we're going to have a big year for the environment, which I'm pretty excited about. The other thing I spend a lot of my time on right now is housing. We don't have to tell the people of Bothell that growth is an issue. And there's not one panacea to fix the issue of affordability and growth management in this area, but there's a lot of things we need to do. And as long as I've been in politics, or at least land use, when I was an appointed planning commissioner in 2011 for Snohomish County till today, I feel like there's a unique point in time that we need to take advantage of next year, and I think everybody's in alignment around this, where you've got normally competing interests saying the same thing. So never since I've been in politics have I had the realtors, the master builders, the BIAW, FutureWise, Forterra, the Housing Alliance, homeless advocates, transit advocates, every single one of those groups that normally fight are all saying the same thing: build more housing. So that is, I think, a unique opportunity that may not be there the following year, right? So I think that we're going to see a massive year, at least in the Senate, on housing. I think the House as well, both in terms of funding and policy. So I have a bunch of policy bills, but a lot of the funding bills are happening in Ways and Means. So we're having that discussion. But I think that there's going to be new revenue. There's going to be a lot more money going into housing, but it's going to come with a lot of reforms and new policy as well. And hopefully that'll help the people around this area, because obviously you used to be able to buy a single-family home in North Creek on the median salary down here in South Snohomish, and you can't anymore. Now you have to move up to Lake Stevens, Marysville, Arlington, Monroe, Duval, and that's getting worse and worse. That pushing people out into the suburbs is getting further and further and further, where we don't even have buses. So that doesn't work, and we have to fix that. The higher ed agenda. We're going to do a lot on workforce development. So we started here, you mentioned the proviso before that we got last year. Half went to the city for Canyon Park Visioning, half went to Cascadia. We did really good work with that in a high demand field, which is biotech manufacturing and life sciences. So what we're going to do in higher ed this year is we're going to look at maybe the top 10 categories, and we're going to do what we did here in Bothell, but on each of those. We're going to go deep and figure out what is our capacity, what does the industry need. Then we're going to do a bill and hopefully come back next year with a cohesive plan that we can fund that says, this school needs $30,000 for curriculum development, and this school needs a professor, this school needs a building, whatever it is that's getting in the way of those high demand fields. We're going to make a detailed plan around that and then come back next year and hopefully fund it. So that's a big deal this year in higher ed. Obviously, it all started here with the biotech stuff. The biotech stuff is going great. Just regionally, just stepping back from that, we're doing a good job. Thank you for all your help. But I think that we've got a lot of potential to grow jobs here in Canyon Park and in this cluster. So I'm working hard on that. And then finally, I left the best for last. So the most important thing, and the only thing that really matters to me next year, unfortunately, is infrastructure. So that's what our district needs. We saw it on your agenda here today. So specifically, we need $70 million for the new STEM 2 building. Former Senator McAuliffe got us STEM 1 building during her time, which was a feat, and we need STEM building 2 right now. Cascadia and UW Bothell are going to share at 35 apiece. It's very high on the list for, it's actually number 1 on the list for UW, so that will probably get funded, but unfortunately the Cascadia Community Technical College list is way too far down. So we have a little bit of an issue with that. It's going to cost the taxpayers more if we wait, so we're working that issue, but that's priority number 1. And then additionally, the 450 that we need, either from gas taxes or if the tolls are going to stay, they need to come up here. The money needs to come up here. So we need to fix 405 over here. That 450 million as well does not include the thing that we've been working on with Davina and Andy about the integration of the 522, 405 BRT, because WASDOT's got that property. They've got it over here, which is the right thing to do. But Sound Transit is basically telling us they don't have money and this wasn't a plan for a stop. So we can spend 300 million in Kirkland for very low ridership, but we can't spend 20 million to make the 405 BRT interchange work. So we collectively may have to get the money for that if there's a gas tax. The other thing is not necessarily Bothell related, but we need 46 million for the bottleneck in Clearview and Route 9. We need 160 million with Route 522 out by me in Maltby. So we have a lot of needs in this district that need an infrastructure funding package in a big way. Senator Hobbs is working that right now in our chamber. We're going to see where that goes. I'm going to support Senator Hobbs on his plans, but ultimately we have to get probably a new gas tax to fund this. The tolls could go away and we could fund the 450 if the gas tax was high enough, but if that's not going to happen and the tolls are here and they're bonded, then that money's got to come from there. But really that's what I'm kind of focused on is the infrastructure package. And I think generally the way it works too in the legislature is people don't like to take the tax votes in election years. So I think that there's a window this year, perhaps with the bigger majorities, but that might not be there in 2020 because it's a short session and people are up for election. So then we're out to 2021. So I think that there's a golden opportunity this year in 2019 to actually fund our projects if we can get it done. If not, I think we're looking out a couple more years.
Can I ask, so I saw Senator Hobbs speak at a skit event, and when I asked him if there was anything in the package that was Bothell, there was nothing. So is there an option to get the BRT interchange or some sort of piece of that in Senator Hobbs' bill? Yeah, well,
just to be clear, Senator Hobbs for the district, not necessarily Bothell, but the district, the current version has 522 funded, it has Route 9 funded, and it has additional design money, I think, for 405. At the moment, they're kind of leaning towards this bonding of the tolls for 405. But to your point, any kind of transit station is a multimodal investment that comes after the funding is there. So let's say we get a gas tax, then we have to get the actual project in the multimodal funding. So that's our job. So we have to do that.
Okay. Yeah, it's just that the last time I spoke with him, he had 4 pages of projects and there weren't any Bothell related ones, and so I thought I'd ask.
405 is commonly viewed as the Bothell project, right? So if we can get the new lanes up here, if we can redo the interchange, if we get the direct connectors at 527 and at 522, and then hopefully the transit station, which is an add-on, which we have to get.
One more quick question. And I know that we do not have a school except maybe within our school district that would directly relate to this, but you were talking about higher education and digging deeper into what industry needs and talking with higher ed about that. Does that also include technical schools as being part of that conversation?
Absolutely, yeah. One of the main things that we had with the biotech work group that we did the consultants report for, that came out with some recommendations, and most of them were smaller recommendations, but the big one was one that you've all known for years, which is to do a training center for workforce in Canyon Park for biotech, very similar to what they do with Boeing up in Everett Community College for Amtech. So basically put together a manufacturing program so that our kids here that are at Lake Washington Tech, or even Edmonds High School's got one, a couple of North Shore schools have one, those kids can have work training, on the job apprenticeships, and go right into these careers. And they're good paying careers right here in Canyon Park. That's the bottom line, is that they've got these jobs, we just don't have the kids to go into them. So we've got to fix that pipeline issue. No?
And I do have one. You spoke about housing, and I know you were talking about affordable housing. Is that correct?
Yeah, all housing. So I think on the policy side, there's a lot of things that have to do with not just affordable housing, but how do we do housing in general? So GMA reforms, things like that, SEPA reforms. Fitzgibbon in the House has got a SEPA reform bill. There's a whole bunch of different housing bills. So yeah, so it's that. But then also the Housing Trust Fund is a big one. The advocates want to double that, so it's about 100 right now. They want about 200 million, and if that were to happen, I think it'll come with a lot more carve-outs on what we spend it on, and maybe some reforms about how the money goes out.
And then one other one is, you said the science building at UW is pretty much supported. Does Seattle, do they support it? Is it on their list?
Yes, it's Seattle's #1 ask. So we're good on the 35 mil for UW. We're not good on the 35 for Cascadia.
Right.
So that's the solve that we have to do.
Thank you. That's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And as an example, I mean, they're turning away our great university and our great colleges right here. They're turning away kids because of physical space in the high demand fields that we're trying to fill jobs in. So that's unacceptable. We can't turn away kids in computer science and nursing and things like that. I mean, we just can't do that.
So I just wanted to kind of tack on, it's not any one of us who are doing this bill, but related to your question, Councilmember Zorns, there's a bill running, Representative Sells, just north of us, is running one that, I don't have the details on it yet, but it sounds like running start for the trades. So where we have now a high school student can do their first 2 years in high school and their second 2 years at a community college, come out with a associate's degree and a high school diploma, you could do the same with the trades and come out having completed your first 2 years of an apprenticeship program. So that kids have a way to get the relevance and the rigor in their high school years that sometimes for kids who really need to understand, why do I have to learn this right now? It's very concrete and understandable, and they're able to get a head start on their career in that way. So I'm excited about that bill.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because I know Lake Washington Tech has had that in the past, and they went beyond the Running Start 2-year period. They went up through age 21 for that. But you know, it's been a long time since I've looked at that program. I don't know if it still exists. Last I knew it did. But the departments that kids could be in were very limited. So for example, they couldn't do dental hygiene in that, but they could do something else. So if somebody's got a bill that's expanding that, that's awesome to hear. Thank you.
I'm always impressed when you guys talk about the Cannabis, Alcohol, and Gambling Committee, because you guys are so serious about it, and I'm always over here laughing. I'd be like the worst guy on that committee.
Well, to that effect, I had a hard time keeping a straight face. The University of Washington and Washington State University had an academic conference about it, which they called, about cannabis, which they called the Joint Symposium on. It was right there, and I just had to work on the poker face. I found it challenging.
And they put you up in front of the thing, and you're supposed to keep a straight face. But so thank you for coming out. I do have one question I didn't hear anything about, and I'm just curious because it's a big deal for us and our community, but mental illness and heroin addiction, it's one of the main reasons why we passed our public safety levy. And I was just curious if the state was going to do anything about the heroin crisis that we're facing.
Yeah, that is an area that has been getting a lot of attention and a lot of awareness around that in the legislature, I think. And so at least in appropriations, there's been a lot of discussion about how we can step up on behavioral health, both on kind of the operating side and then also on the capital side, making sure we've got space, because you know, a lot of times there are people who need programs and there just isn't capacity. So we need to build capacity, and we also need to staff that capacity. So I think there will be a big push around that, both on the budget side and then also on policy, to try to look at what else we can be doing to make resources available, to get resources where they need to be, and to continue with some of the diversion programs that seem to be doing well to keep people who are basically dealing with addiction issues from going into the criminal justice system where it may be more expensive and less effective to deal with them, get them into treatment so that they can actually recover and generally at a lower cost as well. So I think there's a lot of awareness around the need for that right now.
You know, it's all wrapped up together, the behavioral health, just broadly, you know, not just the opioid thing, but the diversion center that you referenced, we were very lucky to get $900K in the budget last year, and I think I came and updated you guys on that, our Sheriff Ty Trineri in Snohomish is running up in Everett, and so far, early reports are that it's a raging success in doing exactly what Representative Stanford just mentioned, is diverting people that should not be getting locked up for very minor offenses and trying to get them the help they need. That's a model that works. Other counties are now looking at Snohomish and saying, we want to do this too. So I think we're going to do more of that, and I think just generally, I mean, the mental health issue, which is often tied to the opioid issue, we're failing at, you know, I think as a state, and I think everybody knows that when you see the Western issue, we've got 50 million in fines there, we got decertified. Everybody agrees the data shows that you get better results with these community-based smaller treatment facilities. The problem is we don't have any. So we have to figure out the capital, and Derek's point, not only the capital to open them, which is $500 million, give or take, and then you have to have people that are actually working in them, that are trained, that know what they're doing, and that are staffing it, which is an operating ask. So it's a ton of money. It's one of the biggest issues with the budget next year in terms of what we can do and what we can't do. Senator Braun, who's a Republican, last year had a bill that would have sent it out to the voters for a vote of the people to go outside the debt limit to do $500 million in bonds to do these build-outs so in a rapid fashion. It kind of got support. There's some Democrats that supported it. It got bottled up. There were some issues with the debt limit. He put 250 in, 250 out at the end. I expect that bill to come back. And I don't know if that'll wind up being the path for building out the mental health system, but I suspect it will be. But, you know, realistically, we have to make about $500 million investment in mental health that we don't currently have the money for in capital. So we have that's one of the big budget problems next year.
How much is the operating side of that? Do you know?
I actually don't know if we built that out, what the operating is. I've been focused on the capital.
Okay.
Yeah, but a lot of money. I mean,
But giving you a little bit of history, so I think this is important, is that when we started to shut down the mental institutions and send people out into the community, we didn't have adequate resources out there for those people, and we still do not. My concern, and I don't know if you're really going to deal with this in Washington State, but I do know that letting people out of the prisons who, you know, kind of were put in prison because of the small amount of cannabis that they had when it was illegal. Now they're thinking of letting them out because it's now legal. My concern is what kind of capacity is out there in the community for someone who's been in prison for 2 or 3 or 4 years? Is there some place in the community that's going to help them kind of build back up now? That's my big concern when we consider that.
So the state did shut down the mental health institutions. That's what I heard. I didn't know that was for sure. Okay. Wow. Yeah, that would explain it. Okay. Look at that. We're early too. 20 minutes left. Is there anything else anybody wanted to talk about? Staff, there you go. Councilman Olson.
Just if, you know, particularly you, Senator, if you could maybe speak about solar, clean, green energy, incentives or innovation. I know you mentioned it quickly, and, you know, maybe Rep. Kloba also, you mentioned you were on an innovation committee. But yeah.
Going to see all those bills too, and I got a cloud bill coming your way too. Yeah, no, it's going to be, hopefully, it's a big, robust agenda this year. So last year there was a lot of effort on the carbon tax. That didn't happen. Then went out to the voters. That didn't happen. So the 100% clean for utilities, making utilities get to 100% delivered clean fuel on their grid is a top governor priority and a tier 1 bill. So that, you're going to see that week 1. The EV package is another big one because right now, almost 50% of our emissions in the state come from on-road diesel and gas. We have now we have the cleanest electric sector of any state in the nation. It used to be number 2 next to Vermont because they had nuclear. But for some reason, they're moving back to coal. Doesn't make sense. But they were the cleanest. Now we're the cleanest. So our big problem is on-road diesel and gas and ferries. That's where a lot of our emissions come from. So there's an EV ferry bill as well that's going to be in Transpo, transition all into EVs. The EV passenger incentive and the other things that we're doing that with a zero emission vehicle mandate like California. The solar bill, we have the net metering bill that I had last year that died in the House. We're going to bring that back. A right to store your own solar energy or any energy. So right now, a utility can pass a law that basically says you have to sell all your power back to me at my rate. So we're going to get rid of that so you can actually store it and do what you want with it. What else is there? The plastics bill, somebody mentioned the plastic. I think there's going to be several plastic bills. Patty Cooter already dropped the plastic straw ban one, but there'll definitely be a plastic bag ban one. There's going to be a huge MOTCA redo, so to speak, that is going to be involved with not only how it gets spent, but also how much money goes into it. Hopefully there'll be more. What else? There's... Yeah, I mean, those are the big ones. Oh, and then the housing bill. So building efficiency and gas utility efficiency. So changing the building code so that new buildings, especially commercial buildings, big ones, are more efficient, and then retrofitting existing ones with a tax credit. So that's another big governor bill that's coming up. That's also a big chunk of our emissions, actually, in the state is big commercial buildings. Yeah, I'll leave it. Oh, and low carbon fuel standard. That's the other big one. So passing a low carbon fuel standard that they have in California, passing that here as well.
And Representative, you said innovation was one of the committees that you were on. So Bothell is designated as an innovation zone. Senator Castema created the innovation zone for different cities, and it gave us kind of a top priority as far as like being recognized. I'm not sure where that is today, the innovation zones. Would you please kind of see if that needs to be kind of brought forward a little bit? Because I think it was really important.
Yeah, your question is interesting, Councilmember Olson. The Tech and Economic Development Committee in the House used to have the energy issues, but this year, sometimes they reshuffle portfolios of different committees to spread out the workload. And so all the energy issues are now going to be over in the newly constituted, what used to be Environment Committee is now the Energy and Environment Committee. So I think those are really good pairings, but it's not likely that I'll get to see those things the first shot through, although with all of the activity that you're talking about in the Senate, no doubt they will come over to the House side and we'll get to work on those eventually. But I won't get first peek at them in the committee. But definitely, I think that means that we shift a little more over towards economic development, and I will start to educate myself a little bit more about the IPZs and see if that's something that needs any kind of revamp, update, recheck, the old Dr. Phil, how's that working for you? The things that are important to do with legislation over time.
Councilor Agnew.
I just want to have a big shout out for our navigator system. I worked in public safety most of my adult life for 4 decades. And the navigator program that we have right now is probably the biggest game changer that I've seen since the invention of paramedics. It's a huge program that'll have huge benefits in the future. And the state needs to think about funding that totally for all the departments. You can talk to the chief down here, and I'm sure she'll say the same things, but I think the state needs to look at that. You can deal with the opioid epidemic to where there's a place for them to go. You can deal with the mental health issues where you can diagnose them and feed them off and start putting them in the direction they need to go. It's a huge game changer. You guys need to really look at that.
Deputy.
To go back to environment, I wondered if you could tell us at all about what we can look forward to as far as waste reduction and diversion policies, because that's become a pretty big local issue, having to deal with where the recycling goes and the costs of haulers fees and whatnot.
Well, I definitely agree with you that it's something that we do need to address. I'm mindful of it every time I rinse something out to put in my recycling bin. It's like, oh, it can't be wet anymore, because, you know, the secondary market on that has gotten much more particular. And so as cities who already do a lot of recycling, that will have an impact on our waste customers. However, again, I have the feeling that that will be something that Environment and Energy probably takes a look at rather than a committee that I'm in. But we do have to really understand that whole waste stream and what levers can we adjust, and the economic impacts of not adjusting it well, because if we do lose our secondary markets for recyclables, it's going to cost an awful lot of money, as you well know, to rethink our landfill plan and update it for the increased capacity that we're going to have to build in. And so I will keep an ear to the ground on it.
Just chime in on that. Yeah, sorry, but it's actually huge for those that don't know. China stopped taking most of our recycling, and that dried up, 70% of the market. Representative Klob is right. I think that the industry, the recycling and refuse industry, is particularly concerned because right now you've got a situation where the state is a patchwork. So Bothell can choose to do what they want in the recycling. Seattle does what they want. Clay Elum does what they want. Everybody does what they want. Ultimately, the people that are taking that have to deal with it. And if there's no market for their goods, then we're basically not helping anybody. Either that's going to a landfill here, or it's going on a barge and going to a landfill somewhere else in the world. So from an emission standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, it's a disaster. It's a hard conversation to have, but I think it is going to be had next year. There may need to be some kind of state preemption on what we actually recycle or how we recycle, because they're in an untenable situation right now where we're throwing everything at them, but they can only now get money off of this little piece of their thing where they used to get this. So that probably needs to change, in some way. I don't know what that bill is going to look like, but there's definitely somebody taking a crack at it in our chamber. But we have to, it's a hard conversation because we've been grown up, certainly I have. I've grown up with like, oh, you have to recycle, you have to recycle. The problem is that not everything you put in the recycling bin actually gets recycled. So having an honest conversation about, here are the things that actually have a resale market and we could recycle, and here's everything else. Well, now what do we do with everything else? That's a conversation we have to have as a state, given the China policy.
Just burn it. That's what they're
On that score, we actually looked at
They're
that.
talking about it.
Who was it? You weren't with me. Okay, so we did the Copenhagen trip. So there was a legislative trip that you can go on, funded by a nonprofit, to Copenhagen. You learn about their green energy. And there, right in the middle of their bustling, beautiful downtown, they've got a big trash incinerator. And it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful building. It's absolutely gorgeous. But they make energy there with it. I looked into it when we came back from Copenhagen. It's a problem here because of zoning, because in our state, what community is going to be okay with a garbage incinerator, right?
Yeah.
But you can make power out of it. It's just we don't have the infrastructure or anybody that feels the need to do it. Most of our utilities are long on power anyway, so they don't actually need load, so they're not going to invest in it, and nobody wants it in their community. But it's a good idea. It works in Copenhagen.
One thing that Congresswoman Susan Delbeni told me is that the federal government's trying to find ways to have domestic markets for recycling instead of shipping it across seas, because at least for me, the biggest issue with that whole story was that China just destroyed itself environmentally in like 19 different locations by just not having any regulations or controls over how they actually took the products and recycled them, where that wouldn't happen here because we have controls. Well, hopefully it wouldn't happen here. And I know the federal government is looking at ways to try to create more pulp mills and plastic recycling facilities and things like that within the United States. So we'll see how that all turns out.
I would only say, talk to the small private recyclers. Yeah. They do it. They're really amazing.
And I would add on to that, the less we generate, the less we have to deal with it at the end.
Yeah.
So
The 3
being
Rs.
very conscious of our own personal habits, because prevention is, so much better and easier and cheaper.
All right. How are we doing? Are we good? 6:50? Anything else? Any for the good of the order? City manager, you got anything you want to throw down? No? Okay. I thought you had that. Thought you were looking at me. Okay. I guess we don't need to do a motion to adjourn, do we? We didn't do a motion to start. Yeah. Well, we don't do motions to start. We're adjourned. Have a good night, everybody.